Alright, we are back on Roman numeral 8. Still in letter E though, okay? So, starting Roman numeral 8, letter E. Now, speaking about sugar, sugar being a tropical crop, I told you about how the European powers, the powerful countries of Europe, had all established these colonies in the Americas, and wherever possible they were growing sugar. And I mentioned that the sugar was being grown on the Caribbean islands, especially Cuba, controlled by the Spanish, Puerto Rico, controlled by the Spanish, the island of Saint Domingue, which was controlled by the French. Half of that island, Saint Domingue, was controlled by the French. It became Haiti. And the other half, the Dominican Republic, modern-day Dominican Republic, was controlled by the Spanish. Also, countries, islands like Aruba, there was sugar production. That was a Dutch colony. Okay, the French Antilles. These are lesser colonies. But the other big one to discuss is Portuguese Brazil. Okay, Portuguese Brazil was also a very big sugar colony. Now, if you want to look at a map to kind of have an understanding of this, you can look on, let's see, I got a couple maps here we're going to look at. But let's look at the map on page, not that page, hold on, page, not that page, hang in there. Just a second. Okay. I don't have that map. Oh, there we go. I didn't have it marked. Page 443, there's a map. It's a world map. Okay. And we see sugarcane, excuse me. Sugarcane was grown there in Brazil. You can see the little symbol for sugarcane on the map there. There we see in Brazil. It's not identified as being in the Caribbean islands, but it definitely was. Okay, so we find that sugar turns out to be the big money maker. Those European powers, all who possibly can, that is, make money growing sugar. Now, if you think about the North American colonies, those 13 original colonies, okay, they're not tropical regions. Not even Georgia. Georgia was the southernmost part of those 13 American colonies that originated it, that became the original United States. Georgia could not produce sugar, nor could Florida. Florida was a Spanish colony at the time. Florida did not produce sugar. Mexico did not produce sugar. Okay, specifically it was Brazil and these Caribbean islands. Okay, so now back to sugar. Well, sugar is a highly profitable crop, obviously, but it's a very, very labor-intensive crop. To grow sugar, you need a lot of people in the fields, and you need those folks in the fields doing a lot of work. Okay, it's a year-round crop. It's not like some crops that you plant in the spring, you cultivate over the summer, you harvest in the fall, and you got maybe a little bit of time off. Okay, not with sugar. You work a sugar plantation year-round. Okay, very labor-intensive, very hot places to be working, very tropical, very humid. Very difficult conditions. Now, Europeans obviously didn't want to do this work. Okay, they were these upper class, wealthy landowners didn't want to do this work, and even if they did, even if they were inclined to do the work themselves, there was too much for any group of European landowners to do. They had to find some cheap source of labor. Okay, to grow their sugar. Now, let's go on down to letter F, Brazil and the Caribbean. These were the locations of the major sugar plantations among these European powers. Okay, Brazil was controlled by the Portuguese. I've told you this, but let me hit it one more time. Brazil controlled by the Portuguese. The other four major European powers all had islands in the Caribbean. So the Spanish had Cuba. I'll just give you the biggest ones. The Spanish had Cuba. The English had Jamaica. The Dutch had Aruba. And the French had Haiti. Okay, they call it Saint Domingue, but let's just keep it simple and call it Haiti from the beginning. Okay, All the other colonies were not sugar producing colonies, however the Europeans still claimed them, and we're making money in one way or another from them. Okay, so Brazil and the Caribbean were the location of the sugar plantations. Now, letter G, American Indians. Like I was saying a minute ago, sugar is a very labor-intensive crop, and the Europeans were looking for some source of labor to work their sugar plantations. And the first choice was not African slaves. The first choice was enslaving the American Indians, because they're right there, right? They were readily available. There was a huge population of American Indians at the time. And so these Europeans, they began enslaving the American Indians and taking them to their sugar plantations. Now that failed for various reasons. Okay, reason number one is the diseases. Right, these Indians were already getting sick in huge numbers. Okay, and if you put sick and very intensive labor together, you have quick death is what you have. Okay, the Indians were dying off too quickly. Okay, also the Indians had what I like to call kind of a home field advantage. They knew the escape routes, and they knew how to get hidden in the forest and in the wilderness around the plantations, and so they were hard to keep up with. Okay, and the Indians tended to be not very good at hard labor. Okay, they could not work as hard. They gave out more quickly than the Europeans would have liked to. Okay. So the next choice was to go to Africa seeking slaves, because these Europeans knew that African societies were willing to sell slaves. Okay, essentially they're prisoners of war for the most part. Okay, and so they went to Africa and they began exporting slaves from Africa to work in the sugar plantations in the Americas. And we see that's the first real major exportation of African slaves to the Americas. So remember, this doesn't even get started until after 1500, because the Europeans weren't even hardly in the Americas to any significance until after that. Okay, so the American Indians were the first choice of slaves. However, they did not turn out to be very good slaves, and so that is why the Europeans went to Africa seeking slaves. Okay, now let's talk about numbers. Letter H is numbers. What I'm referring to are the numbers of Africans who became slaves. It is estimated, of course, it's hard to really know for certain these numbers, but it is estimated that over the 350-year African slave trade, that is 1500 to 1850, I will want you to know those dates, okay? 1500 to 1850 is the period of the African slave trade. Over that 350-year period, it is estimated that 12 million African human beings were sold to European slave traders. Okay, they were loaded onto ships and taken to the Americas. Now, only about 10 million of those African human beings arrived safely in the Americas. Well, arrived alive in the Americas, I should say. About 2 million died in passage across the Atlantic. Now, these are pretty high numbers, even for those times of people who died in a sea voyage. Now, the question may become, what caused the death of so many of these slaves? Well, I tell you what, I'm going to pick that up with the next unit, because that will go into letter J. So let me go ahead and stop this video at letter I. No, letter H. Okay. Just leave you at that with those numbers. We have 1500 to 1850. That's the period of the African slave trade, 350 years. During that time, we have 12 million Africans who were taken from their homes and sold to European slave traders. Only 10 million actually made it to the Americas. 2 million, therefore, died en route, and we're going to talk about those here in the next video.